Good
Hi.
evening. Welcome to our broadcast this Wednesday night. It is Canada Day.
Yes, happy Canada Day.
Celebrating
to
Canada
everyone.
Day. Absolutely,
Yes.
you betcha.
It's going to be fireworks a little bit later on.
Yep, that's right. So that'll
Not
be kind of
here.
cool. Not in the church, no.
Hopefully we don't create some fireworks.
We may, who knows? Very interesting topics that we're going on right now. So
they're
that kind
really
of thing.
good.
Absolutely. I just want to take the time to say thank you for joining us again in our
Yes.
studio. We're coming to you live at 1920 Wellick Road, right
Yes, we
here in the
are.
Estevan Church of God studios.
Yay.
For Table Talk number 27 or 28.
Yes.
Something like that.
Oh my
Anyway,
goodness, I can't
it's
even
been
remember.
going really, really well, and it's just been such a privilege to
So good.
connect with you through live stream and things like that. My name is Geoff,
I'm Helen.
and we're coming to you live, as I said, together here.
Yes,
And
Wednesday night.
we are-
Table Talk.
Absolutely. We're
What do we-
talking about an interesting subject. We titled it Real Life 101.
Real life.
And one of the things that I think is important to keep reminding our listeners and watchers is the fact that it's important to understand that it's about real life. I used an illustration last week. When I was a soldier, we talked about having boots on the ground, actually referring to that we're there present. We're not watching something. We're not having ideals.
Yes.
We're actually on the ground dealing with whatever comes our way.
Yes.
And sometimes my frustration of growing up in church culture, often I wasn't equipped to deal with boots on the ground stuff. I've often was taught about ideals, and so because of that, my framework of my faith began to be formed based on ideals. And when it wasn't working, because when there was things that were going on in my life that I couldn't control, I immediately began to question, what am I doing wrong? And why is God against me? Or why in particular am I going through these things? I always, there needed to be a reason, because
it didn't fit.
It didn't fit.
It didn't fit.
And it took me years, and it took me years to begin to wrestle through that we need to understand that God has equipped us to live real life. Real life meaning the bumps, the wipeouts, the frustrations, the rug getting pulled out from underneath us, the things that we have to climb over and overcome, the emotions, the feelings. And I began to recognize that those things weren't bad in themselves. They weren't a sign that the devil is attacking, or everything is just going to nothing, but rather it was just simply opportunities for me now to apply the truths that I learn or am learning, so that I can rise above those things. And so when we come to relationships, and we're talking Real Life 101, we're talking about relationships and how important relationships are. And you made a great point a couple of sessions ago by saying, why are relationships so important? And I thought that was a really important point, because the reason we said is because we're built for relationships.
Yes, we are built for connection, aren't we, honey?
Absolutely. And when that's not right, everything else seems to be jarred away.
And you can't do life without relationships.
No.
Don't matter. We're born into families. We go to work. There's relationships all around us.
Absolutely,
we have them.
there is.
So how can we have healthy relationships? And that's what we want to talk through.
And that's a great point. Healthy, because again, we don't live in an ideal system. We don't live in an ideal world. And sometimes we're frustrated with that. Why don't people think like me? Because the dynamic of relationships is we think different.
Wow.
We have different values. We have different beliefs. We have different ways about going through life. And the big one is we have different interests. And so how does that all mesh together? And it does mesh together when we understand some important principles that help guide building healthy relationships in a realistic world, in a realistic context.
That's right.
And so, again, one of the things that we want to communicate with you too is that we don't have the end all to all this stuff. These are things that we're developing. We've learned over time. We've learned in our relationship. We learned in other things, and we know what wasn't working.
That's the thing.
We know what wasn't working.
A lot of the things that we've learned, is because they didn't work. We failed at some stuff in
Absolutely.
our relationship and even
Absolutely.
outside relationships. And so sometimes we learn, we gain wisdom. You gain wisdom sometimes by failing, which sucks. But that's how we grow.
I preached a message a while back, and I said, failure is not the end. In fact, you need to fail in order to grow and succeed in life.
That's right. Anyone that has succeeded has failed.
Has failed as well.
Yeah.
So failure isn't our enemy. Rather, it is our opportunity.
Yes.
And so when we view it from that perspective and really hear our heart, because we want to share with you important real life stuff that help you. It's not so much we're selling something as we want to offer something, because we want you to reach your potential.
Yes.
And when we understand that, and it blossoms in our life, not only does faith come alive, but then every aspect of that life that we live with faith is unique and dynamic as well. Not negating the fact that there's going to be bumps and struggles, and when you're dealing with relationships, sometimes there can be head-on collisions.
Oh, totally. And the journey to thriving is going to be challenging. And that's
right.
the thing. There's going to have to be some changes going on in you.
We have to be willing to take some of this stuff and work it into our life. I like the illustration oftentimes. Growing up at home, I watched my mom bake a lot when I was younger and not in school or on Saturdays sometimes, and she made incredible buns and incredible cinnamon rolls, and I loved the fact that she cut off the ends of the cinnamon rolls, and I ate those ends without having that cinnamon and that brown sugar. I mean, it was wonderful.
Honey.
But I watched her put ingredients in and work it into the dough, and if we're not willing, and this is important to understand,
It is.
if we're not willing to work it into our life, we'll never ever experience the benefits
We're
of
not
that.
going to taste it.
We often want the cinnamon bun.
Yes.
We often want the cookie or this ginger snap after everything is done, but we don't recognize that there's a process of getting there. And if we want healthy relationships, there's a process of getting there. If we want an effective faith life, if we want to cultivate healthy relationships with people around us and with God, there's always a process involved, and there's gonna require some working in to the mix. So what we want to do by these table talks is give you ingredients that you can mix into already what is in your dough.
Because we're not going to mix it for you. You're going to have to do the mixing. That is important to understand, because many times we want other people to do all the work when it's our responsibility. Yes.
And I think we've talked about this too. It's really easy to blame other people for our problems. And other people may contribute. People may be the source at even times. But it's what we do with it that makes the difference if we're going to rise above and enjoy the benefits of living free and living in abundance, or living under pressure.
You are so
and
right.
living under other people's words that are always spoken over us. And so we need to have our own bowls, and we need to mix our own ingredients. And that's partly why I like the Bible so much, is because it offers ingredients. It isn't take it or leave it or you're done, but rather here, mix some of this in to your life and watch it develop.
I like that.
Development is going through real life.
Yeah.
It's going through the poopy stuff, and it's going through the stress stuff. And I, to this day, still have to work through negative mindset. I have to still work through guilt and shame. I still have to work through expectations and all those different aspects of things in people's lives. And so we want to dive right into it and go to number 2 that we want to talk about. We talked about last week, we talked about, in order to thrive or to real life 101, was the first step in whole relationships is communication, and how important communication is. And there was an interesting point made too, that sometimes communication isn't only what's spoken, but what's perceived by our actions and our attitude or our demeanor. We can say a lot by not saying anything.
That's right.
And so communication is key if we want to have healthy relationships. But the second thing, and also if you're new to this series that we're doing, if you go back 2 sessions, we give you an introduction to what we're going and what this series is all about that we're doing these next table talks. And so today we want to talk about, this is a big one.
Yeah.
If we want to thrive in relationships, and again, relationships in the context of marriage or friendship, work, acquaintances, just the dynamic of relationship.
Any relationship. Yeah.
And others will be deeper than others and more, and everything has its context, but in order for relations to thrive, Number two is expectations.
Expectations.
This is a big one. This is a big one. In fact, all of them are big. I think I've said that at the beginning. Each one we're going to say, this is a big one.
Yes, don't forget this one.
But
you're going to need this one.
We're going to give you some ingredients that you can mix into your life. It's going to take work.
Yep.
It's not going to happen overnight. But let's talk about expectations.
Yeah.
This is a big one.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about expectations is sometimes they're not communicated. They're not communicated.
Yeah.
We make assumptions of what we expect from the other person or what we expect from ourselves. That's a big one too, because oftentimes what we expect of ourselves is often what we expect of other people. And so if we have a high expectation, we expect a high expectation too.
And I have some stuff written down here, honey, because I didn't want to forget anything. Every relationship involves expectations, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter employee to employer. It doesn't matter
acquaintances, friends, partners,
or whatever. You're gonna have expectations. It's just a part of relationships.
Yeah.
And how does that create problems? Like, why is expectations so huge in creating such dysfunction in relationships?
With everything in life, there's usually 2 things that can always happen. One, there can create an abundance, or it can create what you just described as dysfunction.
Yeah, chaos and
dysfunction.
Yeah.
And a lot of the chaos and dysfunction is a result of expectations. When we expect something of others, and those expectations aren't met, we tend to be disappointed, frustrated, and often leads to anger, leads to frustration, leads to disappointment, all those different things. Expectations is a big deal.
Yeah, and you know what I have? It says here, and I know we said relationships and people, but your job, how your bank, your church, like there's all expectations. And you know what? This one was written down here, and it got my mind thinking. On the highway, there's expectations.
Oh, we have expectations. Yeah,
and I thought of this because our son went to a different country on a trip, and here we have expectations. When the light is red, everybody stops, and you wait for it to green, and then you can go. And then there's the walk light. Everybody has this expectation of everybody's following the rules.
Yes.
Then you go to another country, and you're expecting that's going to happen there. And all of a sudden, I remember our son said he was going to cross the road, and the walk light was on, and somebody grabbed him and pulled him back. He says, "You can't walk." He's like, "Why? It's like walk time." They said, "Oh no, they're going to drive you right over. There is no rules here. People do their own frickin' thing."
Yeah.
And there was chaos when the expectations were met. Horns honking 24/7. It's just like total chaos. That's what happens when you don't tell your expectations.
And I think it's important to understand too that kind of thing happens in relationships.
Yes.
Horns are going, sirens are going, people are hollering because you're expecting something and someone else has another expectation, and it just turns into chaos.
And they don't care what you're expecting. They have their own mindsets.
That's often the reality of it is.
It is. And it creates a lot of havoc.
Yes.
In relationships.
Absolutely.
So
we want to to give you 3 things
yes.
that we've learned and are applying to our life in this aspect, because we want a healthy relationship. I want healthy relationships wherever I am, and so that means there's some work that I have to do in the mix of this thing. And so 3 things that we want to talk about in regarding to expectations that'll help you mix up and integrate into your own life so that you can thrive in relationships. And the first thing, and it's important to understand, is we've got to learn to communicate them.
That was rule number 1.
Rule number 1 is communication.
So that goes right alongside with our expectations.
How many times have we run into conflict, or have you run into conflict, or experienced conflict because you've had an expectation of someone or of yourself that wasn't followed through, and it left you frustrating? Expectations are things that got to be communicated.
Don't assume the other person knows your expectations.
That's huge.
That is huge.
Where often relationships go off the rails is, 1, communication is out the window. 2, their expectations have never been communicated, and they don't know. It's like unspoken. But you sure do know when you don't meet it, because boom. That's usually what happens.
Don't assume that they
Never
know
assume.
your
Never
expectations.
assume. Communicate your expectation. Talk about what you expect. Because, and this is important to understand too. Communicating your expectations, we need to be careful we don't do it when we're hurt, or when we're frustrated or disappointed. Because what happens is we carry that attitude into that, and then they don't only become expectations, they become demands and requirements without any communication, without any dialogue, without any negotiating, without any talking about it. They just, here it is, bang, 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 and I'm going to check up on you, bang, 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 and if you don't do bang, 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 then you're going to get bang, 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 bang.
Wow.
So communicating is important, and I think that helped us out, because for years we never communicated on that level. We just made assumptions that this is what I expected, this is what you expected, and I think one of the biggest hurdles that I had to cross was expectations of myself. I had extremely high expectations. I did not realize that I had high expectations. But man alive, when I didn't meet those expectations, then I was down on myself. And then I was angry with myself. And then I called myself stupid and dumb and idiotic. And why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you learn? And so what happens is that created a tunnel of destructive behavior on myself. And when that happens here, it will always get my heart, always overflow to other people around you. When we're not healthy, when we're not right inside, when we're wounded and damaged and hurt, and we don't know how to deal with that, we have the tendency to do the very same thing to people around us. And all we create is carnage. Nobody wins in a situation like that.
Nobody wins.
But when we started to talk about, this is what my expectation was, and I began to deal with myself, that I didn't have my expectation way up here. And then when I hit here, I was extremely disappointed. And that's the same way I treated other people. My expectation was here. There was no room for failure. There was no room. There was no excuse big enough why you couldn't reach that. And that just really created havoc in our relationship and relationships around, and how we had to deal with that. And so when we started communicating about it, sometimes it's uncomfortable.
Oh, it is.
But it's better to talk about those expectations so that everyone involved can talk through them.
Yes. So sometimes when we just assume the other person understands our expectations, or what we want, or what we need, or, you know, our expectations, and we just assume they know, and when they're not met, and I actually just found some of these negative emotions that come out when we're assuming, and it's not being met, our expectations are not being, that anger.
Yes.
And so when you recognize that negative emotion, check inside to see what am I thinking? What am I assuming that they're not fulfilling my needs or whatever
because
it
that
is.
anger builds sometimes
Yes,
when
it
the
does.
expectation isn't met. The expectation is met. We don't say nothing. We don't talk. We don't communicate.
No.
It just builds and builds and builds until something happens, and then we unload.
Yeah,
and I remember where did that come from?
And I remember that, like
Yes.
early on in our relationship, just the assumption of the expectations that I would have on you.
Yeah.
Because you were very different than my father. Like, I was expecting you to be like this,
Yes.
because that was just all I saw and all I knew.
Yeah.
And my expectations, then you would just get so frustrated, and I would want to try to control you, and I'd want to try to put you in that box, like,
and put pressure, and then
yes, and it
boom.
it actually created such a not healthy relationship for a long time.
And I think we built on that unhealthiness, and it just kept getting worse. And what we want to tolerate, we accept. And so we came to a point where we said, listen, this has got to change. If we want to be right, if we want to be healthy, we have to talk about these things. And sometimes talking about these things is saying, listen, when you say this to me, this is how it makes me feel. When you communicate to me at this level, I feel like a little child, and then I want to defend myself, and or vice versa. You overpower, and you don't give me space to breathe. And so
that's right.
We have to talk about those expectations. Listen, I need to be able to talk without you interrupting, because I need to tell you how I feel. And we have to value one another enough to let that happen. And sometimes when we're so geared and so revved and so ready to go, we don't hear. We talked about that communication. We don't hear each other, and we're sometimes we don't talk because we're waiting for our turn.
Listen up.
Yeah, that was one of the points in there. So
that was a good
we
one.
got to communicate our expectations.
Yeah,
it's
don't
important.
assume.
Don't assume.
Communicate them.
The second thing that we want to talk about here, as we're bringing this closer to the end of our segment here, this broadcast, is we have to ask ourselves this question: are our expectations fair and reasonable?
And that's a good one, because you actually mentioned that before, because you really struggled with having expectations that sometimes you couldn't meet, but then you'd expect it from others, and nobody could meet, because sometimes we have this perfectionism expectation, and we can't. And so we're always feeling shame, or we're always feeling this.
We talked about, too, it's important throughout the series that we have to surround every aspect with grace, because we're not going to meet everybody's expectation. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to be able to fulfill everything that maybe we feel ourselves need to be, or we put it on other people. And that's why communication is so important. We need to talk about that stuff. We need to talk about our expectations. And also we have to ask ourselves, and it's important for us to be honest, to ask us, is this reasonable? Is it reasonable? Now, I might think it's reasonable. But if we don't talk about it, you may say, there's no way. There is no way on this side of heaven that's going to happen that way. I can certainly do this. And when we learn to exercise grace, and this was a big thing, you exemplified that in my life, and that helped me see and apply that to your situation and the people around me, is, listen, not everybody's going to reach this, nor should that be the goal. The goal is to bring you your best. And sometimes someone else's best isn't our excellent. And we have to talk about that and work through that, so that this becomes a together thing rather than a banging thing. And so that's so important. Are they realistic? Are they fair?
And you know what? This book has been so helpful for even us working through some of our mindsets and expectations. And I just read something in there tonight, and it said this: sometimes when our expectations are so high, and we demand all of our expectations to be met, ourselves and others and the world around us, to follow our rules, to sing to our tune, and if they don't, there's hell to pay. Recognizing that problematic thinking, you're expecting yourselves, others, the world, life to follow all your rules and to never break them. And then it says, when we hold attitudes, standards, belief about how everyone should act, it's not wrong to have those opinions, But we have to become flexible.
Yes.
Because it's going to cause relationships to just...
And that's important for success in relationships.
Yeah.
There has to be flexibility.
Yeah.
And sometimes we've been hurt. I know we've been hurt. We've worked through hurt. And it seems like when we're hurt, then the expectations go up. And there's no give and take. And I love that aspect of it.
And you know what? When we have those expectations and they're never met because they're so high...
Yes.
It will cause negative emotions in us.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's going to disturb us and cause us a lot of turmoil inside.
And another thing what it does is we already assume they're not going to meet them. So we already build up a mechanism that when we connect with them, see them, we're waiting for an opportunity, then we unload because we already... And it's important for us to acknowledge when things have been done.
Yeah.
And that isn't done. Hey, I noticed that. That's great. Thank you for not talking like that to me. Or whatever.
Yes.
It's to acknowledge those different things. And so again, the statement is: are our expectations fair and reasonable?
Yes.
And I put a little note here as we were getting to get ready for the broadcast here in the studio. It might be for you. But what about the others involved? Is it fair to them? And that's where relationships are awesome. There's a dynamic to something that we can build.
Yes, and you're gonna have to grow.
Yes,
there's gonna have to be a growing in both sides. There's gonna
and I know
have
from
to
my
be
life when I started lowering my expectations, not expecting nothing, but being fair, talking about them, giving grace when those aspects come. Yeah. It's amazing how our relationship flourished and how my relationship with other people flourished well because I didn't have this thing that if they don't tick 5 of the 4, they're gone. I didn't have that agenda, and it's just amazing.
And I just want to build that hope in you.
Yes.
Because we've walked through it, honey. We've walked through a lot of the stuff that we're going to be sharing, some of these points. And it's not the end all, but it is tools to help you because we are not where we were 10 years ago even.
No, we weren't.
And it's amazing. There is hope.
That's why it is so important to emphasize that because nothing has to be an obstacle. Those obstacles have to become opportunities if we're going to grow. And that's where God comes in. I believe the God factor is so important because Holy Spirit is not there to affirm our expectations. He's not there to affirm others' expectations. He's there to help us work through those expectations. Yeah. Because he's committed to see us both thrive. Yes. And that's where the hope is. That's where the excitement is. And that's what we want to share with you is to share with you. We're two people here that have gone through the ringer. Yeah. And we've decided early on that we wanted to grow through it and we wanted to learn. And now it's a whole different dynamic.
And like we said, mostly we learn through our failing.
Yep.
Where we had really crashes and bumps and some crises in our relationship where we actually had to grow. Yep. We actually had to, number 3,
the third thing that we want to bring in as we're coming to a close here is there's got to be give and take.
Give and take.
There's got to be give and take.
We've got to be flexible.
I like the word flexible because even when you look at your body, when you start exercising and doing things and you're not flexible, you damage things. And a person has been in a major car accident or broken bones or torn ligaments or something gone wrong with their bodies. There's a process of surgery that happens. They go to the problem, they fix the tear, they fix the break, they fix the thing that's not in place. They sew you back up, and it's called recovery. But after recovery, there's what you call rehabilitation. And that is simply, in real easy terms, where they teach you to be flexible. Because if you don't learn to be flexible, you're going to re-injure and re-damage that part over and over and over again. And I know that from experience. Rehabilitation is not always fun. It hurts. When you have not moved your knee for a long time because it's been in a brace, now the brace is taken off, and you're in rehabilitation. What do? They start bending that knee, and it's like, Yeah. And what they do is they push you to the point of pain, and they hold it there, and then relax. And then they bring it back again, and then they relax. Why? Because they want to flex those injuries so they can heal and become normal the way it's supposed to function.
Yeah.
But it's not fun.
No.
It's not fun at all. We've watched that even in our family. Someone had a major accident and had to work through rehabilitation. Couldn't move his foot. Had to stretch and flex it, all that kind of stuff. And so that's where the communication, that's where talking about expectation is.
Yes.
Dealing with the unspoken expectations,
Yes.
dealing with the assumptions or making assumptions or assuming, working those things
And
through.
I love how you use that analogy just about rehabilitation and becoming flexible again, because that is going to prevent you from being in pain and re-injuring that place. And I'm like, wow.
How many times have I hurt my back?
Yeah.
What does the chiropractor say? The worst thing you can do is lay in bed. You're going to have to get up and stretch, bend over, and move it. That's the only way that it's going to come back into a stage of healthiness again. And I think sometimes we do this often when we get hurt.
And our expectations are rigid.
Yeah.
And we won't budge.
There's no flexibility there.
You are going to get hurt.
And that's the potential of always getting hurt, always damaging, always injury.
Wow.
And that's where, again, I want to say, that's where relationships are so incredibly unique. Because they have a taken ability of something that's been hurt and damaged and can work on it and rehabilitate it.
Yes.
That it becomes even stronger than when it was first broken.
And we do know people
Absolutely.
that have walked through hell and crashed and burned, and we have seen such a rehabilitation and a flexibility and powerful stories.
Very much so.
And we have a story too.
Yes, we do.
And so do you.
Yes, and we want to celebrate with you, and we want to champion what you're doing. And so that brings this broadcast to a close on expectations. We just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to invite us into your home, into your vehicle, wherever your social devices are. Yes. And we are just so appreciative of that. So we will see you on Table Talk next Wednesday. Yeah. And if you like what you heard, there's more on YouTube, our YouTube channel. There's our Facebook page.
Yes.
And we are looking forward to Sunday morning to starting off with our regular service.
Yes.
And those that aren't going to be there, it'll be online shortly after Sunday morning that it's done. But Wednesday will be Table Talk again, and we'll talk about number 3 in Real Life 101.
Real Life 101.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you so much. We'll talk to you later.
Have an awesome evening, guys.
Have a great Canada Day evening. Bye-bye.
Yes, we'll see ya.